When we think about accessibility in the theme park industry, we often think in terms of, okay, if a person can transfer from their mobility device to this ride, it's now accessible. And in some cases that's true, but for us, ultra accessible, and I learned this when I came here, someone who uses a wheelchair or someone who uses any type of mobility device, especially if they've used that device since birth, they consider that device to be a part of their body. And so to separate them from that, you're now separating them from essentially their body. So it's very important that any ride or attraction we have, whatever your accessibility, your mobility device is, we don't separate you from that.
The Future of Fun begins at IAAPA FEC Summit, January 19th through the 21st, 2025 in New Orleans, Louisiana.
Join FEC and LBE professionals for an immersive experience packed with strategic insights, networking, and behind-the-scenes EDUTours of unique local facilities.
Learn how to make your FEC stand out in a crowded market and explore the latest trends designed to elevate your business.
Build valuable connections and leave inspired with actionable strategies for success.
Click the link in the show notes to reserve your spot today.
Welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast, where we discuss the latest trends and challenges facing the attractions industry today.
We chat with some of the top leaders in the field and provide resources that will help develop your career in this great industry.
I am Josh Liebman. I am obsessed with the guest experience and helping attractions make that their top priority for success.
And I'm Matt Heller. I am passionate about organizational effectiveness, leadership development, and employee engagement.
Now sit upright, hold on tight, and get ready for the Attraction Pros podcast.
Hey, Josh, how are you?
Hey, Matt, I'm doing great. How are you?
I am fantastic.
All right.
Giddy up. Giddy up. Hey, I got a question for you.
Okay.
All right. So when someone says, I've got a complex problem to solve, is that something that you run toward and say, I want to dig into a complex problem? Or do you say, not for me?
Definitely the latter. Please only bring me your simple problems. The simpler, the better.
That's what I thought you'd say.
No, I should probably give you the right answer and say I enjoy a good challenge from time to time. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about you?
I would say, just as I thought about the question, it really depends on the context of it, right? So, I'm a drummer, a musician, and I've been getting more into playing lately. And I've found that there's, to my level of expertise on certain instruments, there's some very complex problems in terms of how you finger things on a bass or how you might play things on a keyboard. And I really love diving into those kind of problems. I also love complex people problems. Those are things that I love diving into. But if you ask me to talk about the complexities of the IRS tax code or insurance or something like that, my eyes will glaze over and I will not be able to help you whatsoever.
So keep it to people and music.
I think that's a good starting point. Sure. What about you? What's the context for you?
Interesting. The problems that you mentioned of music, I've been trying to, I guess I haven't been trying that hard. Otherwise, I'd be a lot better at playing piano at this point. But, that's a complex problem that I'm trying to figure out slowly but surely in my free time, all the spare time that I have these days.
Yeah.
I enjoy a good logistical puzzle. From here and there. There's nothing in particular that kind of stands out in my head. But if it's trying to make a lot of things work and pieces fitting together that appease all different types of groups of people in the room or the audience that we're serving, I think is kind of a fun complex problem to solve.
Well, and honestly, what that made me think of was service recovery.
Oh yeah, there you go.
Those are complex problems, and you have to maybe appease a lot of different people, and yeah,
that's my answer. Service recovery.
it's a very good.
We got there somewhere.
It's a good, well thought out prepared answer. Well done.
So why do you ask?
Oh, why do I ask? Because our guest today, Mr. Richard Pretlow, says that solving complex problems beautifully is something that architects do, that theme park operators do, probably that airline pilots do. But it was quite a bit of the base of our discussion today with Richard, who is the park president of Morgan's Wonderland.
Yeah, when he added the word beautifully to solving complex, we can all talk about solving complex problems, but then once he added that word beautifully, that it wrapped it around with an aesthetic of kind of putting it in a box with a bow on it and kind of packaging it all together. So like you said, yes, he's the president of Morgan's Wonderland in San Antonio, Texas. He's been there since early 2023, but he's been in the industry for quite a while. He's worked for some of the big names, Six Flags, SeaWorld, Crayola, and now he's at Morgan's Wonderland, and we get to learn all about his leadership style. We get to learn about the park. We get to learn about the story. And we get to learn about ultra accessibility, because it's not just accessibility, it's ultra accessibility. And he shares with us really what the difference is between the two.
And one of the things I wondered was, will there be a time when we don't have to call it ultra accessibility anymore? It's just Morgan's is the standard for accessibility.
Yeah, I hope so. I think that all the things that he talked about and the way that the park operates, you can listen to it and go, well, that just makes sense. That's just how it should be everywhere else. And he even talks about how only a small portion of the guest demographic identifies as having a disability, because Morgan's Wonderland truly is for everybody. It is not just a park for people who identify as having disabilities or special needs or impairments, but truly being able to serve everybody, which is a tall order. That's a very big challenge. And it's just so fascinating to hear how they solve that complex problem beautifully.
And it takes a bit of a mindset shift, and he certainly talked about that, coming from the for-profit world into the nonprofit world, coming from what I might call a traditional theme park into the ultra accessible theme park. And so many different facets of our conversation kept coming back to how important it is. Sometimes you just got to shift your mindset. Sometimes we get stuck. Sometimes we are in a formula and we just need to break out of that. So I thought it was really refreshing to hear him talk about that.
Yeah. So should we solve the complex problem of hosting this podcast?
Yes. And that is for us to stop talking and get to the interview with Richard.
That's how we're going to do it beautifully. Here we go.
Hey, Richard, welcome to the Attraction Pros podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
We're doing great. So excited to have you on the show today. Can you start us off by telling us a little bit about your career?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I've had a pretty terrific career in this business. Started out at Busch Gardens in Williamsburg. So I'm from the Williamsburg, Virginia area. And what's interesting about my career is that I never really intended to be a theme park guy or a theme park pro. I went to school to be an architect and was finishing up my master's degree and was like, you know what, I don't know if I want to be an architect anymore. Needed a job for the summer and just started working at Busch because I just needed some money, and originally applied for rides, and the recruiter said, well, we need people in food service, so we're going to send you over there. Started working at Busch, and it was just a terrific experience. The people that I've met, the connections that I've made, it's just been really great. But what really inspired me to stay in this business was a gentleman by the name of John Riley. He was the park president of Busch Gardens Williamsburg when I first started there. And orientation, he walked in and he had such a leadership presence and a gravitas about him. And at a time where I was struggling with what I wanted to do with my life, I said, I want to be like that guy. So that's really what I've been chasing ever since. So I've had an opportunity to work at Busch Williamsburg, Sesame Place in Philadelphia, spent some time with Crayola Experience when they were launching their attractions. Spent some time with Six Flags, worked at Six Flags Great Escape in Lake George, New York, was park president of Six Flags America, came down to San Antonio in 2022 as the VP of Revenue for SeaWorld San Antonio, and then the opportunity opened up at Morgan's for me to lead the charge here as park president. So that's been the last 16 years of my career there.
That's so fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. I was trying to draw a geographic line up the East Coast and then straight down into San Antonio right there. I've got a question though. You talked about going to school to be an architect, and I'm curious if we could touch on that for a moment. Was there anything about maybe the mindset of architecture or even just being an architect that you're able to pull into your career, the career path that you did chose and the job that you did today? Is there any overlap between the two?
There is, and it's all in how you think. So when you think about architecture, you're combining the beauty of art and the science of engineering. So you have to solve a complex problem, which is the engineering side of it, in a very beautiful way, which is the art side of it. And so what we do every day in theme parks, we're solving problems. We're solving problems for our guests. We need to solve complex problems beautifully and make sure that we don't impact the guest experience, we don't take anything away from them, but also make sure that we deliver on a great team member experience as well, because they're very important to our operation. So it's all in the way that we think and we solve problems is kind of what you can bring from the architecture field.
So now I have to ask a follow-up question on that because you said something that I was thinking at the same time, which is that in the theme park world, in the attractions world, we're solving complex problems all the time. And I'm curious if you can maybe break down that process a little bit, just kind of how you go about solving problems and, maybe even some tips or tricks for people that might be listening.
Absolutely. So the number one place where you can really learn about problems firsthand is from your frontline team members. They're closer to the operation than anybody else, and they hear directly from the guests when something's going on. So it's very important to get that feedback, but to really metabolize that info and understand, okay, what's the root cause of this problem and what are some steps we can take to solve it. There's some things where it's like, okay, that's going to take some capital. And then there's some other items where it's like, okay, by simply moving an entrance here or doing this or repositioning some team members, we can solve a major issue for both our team members and our guests. So it's taking that step back and also looking at things from the guest point of view as well. I think it's important for park leaders to, yes, we walk our park as employees and we look at things from the employee point of view, but walk your park as a guest and understand what the guests go through. Wait in a line, go through a food service line, make sure you go through your guest bathrooms, not just the bathroom that's located in the team member area or in the office. And then you'll really know what's going on in your operation. That's where you really start to solve problems.
Mm.
Feel like we could really dive deep and unpack a lot of the complexities and the nuances of that. And I'm sure that we probably will throughout the course of the conversation here. But we want to make sure we talk about Morgan's Wonderland as well. And curious if you can talk a little bit about maybe for those who aren't necessarily familiar with the park, can you share just what is, I would say, the story of the park, but I know that's a very elaborate story, but we kind of touching into the story and then into the park and the property itself.
Of course. The story of the park is very interesting in that our park was founded and built by a San Antonio home builder by the name of Gordon Hartman. He built his first home when he was 19. He retired when he was 41. He sold his home building business. And the inspiration for the park is his daughter, Morgan, who has both physical and cognitive special needs. So they were on vacation one year in the early 2000s, and Morgan is very tall. She's about 6'4", and at the time she was nonverbal. She speaks now, but at that time when she was a teenager, she didn't. So they were in a pool at a hotel, and Morgan saw some kids in the pool who were playing with the ball, and she wanted to go play with them. And as she approached them, they grabbed their ball very quickly and got out of the pool, just not knowing how to interact with someone who is non-speaking, not knowing how to interact with someone who is so much taller than they are. And so Gordon was inspired to build a place where everyone could play and learn together. So that occurred in 2007, and the park opened in 2010. So we have 25 ultra accessible attractions in both our dry park and our water park. And all of our attractions are designed so that if you are a wheelchair user or you have a sensory issue or sensory sensitivity, we can accommodate you. none of our attractions here, you have to, if you're a wheelchair user, you don't have to get out of your wheelchair to experience our attractions. You don't have to get out of your wheelchair to experience our carousel, our Ferris wheel, even our motion theater. You can experience those things in your mobility device. And when we say we're for everyone, my first impression of Morgan's Wonderland, because I'd heard about it long before I came to San Antonio, it was just that park for folks with special needs. Well, it's really not. We're really a park for everybody. And when you think about the world and kind of just the different abilities we have in the world, I mean, we need more Morgan's Wonderlands in the world, a place where regardless of your ability, you're accepted. We know how to take care of you. We have things that can accommodate you. Even our bathrooms are what we call ultra accessible. So that's really the short version of the story of the park. But yeah, we're an ultra accessible park, and we pride ourselves on the things that we do for the special needs community. But we really are for everybody. Only about 20% of our guests identify as having a special need.
So I'm going to kind of tie this maybe back to architecture a little bit. I'll bring this around. So in architecture, you talked a lot about mindset, right? And how you solve those complex problems, and thinking about things from now the park president position as someone who's over this facility that's ultra accessible, and you've come from places that, had some accessibility, for people with special needs. And now that's really the focus. But as you said, it's really about everybody. So is there a different mindset for working at some place like Morgan's, where the mission is really to be ultra accessible to everyone, versus some places you've worked in the past? And I'm not saying it's a bad thing or it's a good thing. I'm just curious if there's, a different mindset that you bring to work now every day with this kind of product and offering.
There certainly is a different mindset. Coming from a traditional theme park, when it comes to someone who has special needs or someone who has a disability, you're accustomed to saying either no or yes, but you have to do this, and this. The mindset here is that we can find a way to make it happen. And I'll give you an interesting story. When I first started here, we had an attraction called the Off-Road Adventure. It's been retired now. We've replaced that with another attraction. But at the time, it was It was the Off-Road Adventure, and it was just a Jeep ride with the cars that go along the magnetic track. And so we had two ride operators. One was fully abled, and believe it or not, one was visually impaired. And when the VP at the time told me that, I said, "Oh, no, that goes against all industry standards. We can't have someone who is visually impaired as a ride operator. That sounds impossible." And she told me, "Well, you just need to see it first before you make a statement like that." So we open, and I see this gentleman in action, and I've never seen anything quite like this before. He was so in tune with the different sounds of the Jeeps approaching, where they are on the track. He knew exactly where it would stop. He knew exactly where the exit gate was. He knew exactly, just based on the sound of the feet, how many people were on the attraction. I mean, I had never seen anything like that quite before. And so I'm not by any means saying that parks need to start letting folks who are visually impaired start to operate rides, but it's one of those things where I would have previously said no, and now I'm like, okay, someone who is visually impaired can operate a ride. Yes, there's certain parameters that go along with that, but yes, they can. So there's a lot more yeses that we say here than we say no versus traditional theme parks.
The word disrupting comes to mind when it comes to things like industry standards, like your perception, your mindset that caused you to say a visual impaired individual is not able to operate a ride came from very practical standards put in place through the other organizations that you had worked with, and through this mindset shift, I think, you know, it sounds like Morgan's Wonderland is very much a disruptor that other parks can look to as almost a blueprint of operating. And this is both for the guest and for the team member experience, as the example you described. You know, for me personally, when I worked at Universal Orlando many years ago, I was a ride operator at Men in Black Alien Attack. And for those not familiar, it's, you know, it's a flat, dark ride, but you're sitting in the seat and, you know, you've got the lap bar, so very, very traditional ride system. But there was one ride vehicle on it that had several seats removed, and then specifically a carriage or an extension of the ride vehicle that could accommodate a guest in a wheelchair. And I thought that was, you know, just amazingly groundbreaking of, oh, if a guest is not able to transfer out of their wheelchair, they can still ride the ride with their family, with everybody else. And that's one small piece of the type of offering that that Morgan's Wonderland is able to offer to all guests. The question that I'm leading this to is you use the term ultra accessible, and I'm wondering if you can tell us what the difference is between accessible and ultra accessible. Here in the United States, we have the ADA laws, you know, enacted in 1990 to require accessibility, but it sounds like that's the starting line, not the finish line, if I understand that right.
You said it perfect. It's the starting line, but it's certainly not the finish line. So when we talk about ultra accessible, it's interesting you brought up transferring. And so when we think about accessibility in the theme park industry, we often think in terms of, okay, if a person can transfer from their mobility device to this ride, it's now accessible. And in some cases that's true, but for us, ultra accessible, and I learned this when I came here, someone who uses a wheelchair or someone who uses any type of mobility device, especially if they've used that device since birth, they consider that device to be a part of their body. And so to separate them from that, you're now separating them from essentially their body. So it's very important that any ride or attraction we have, whatever your accessibility, your mobility device is, we don't separate you from that. Even our zip line, if you have a breathing apparatus, you can actually take that on the ride with you. We have a device set up that can accommodate that. So it's all about making sure that whatever life support, mobility, accessibility devices or services you have, you don't need to be separated from those things. That's what ultra accessible means. That's what it means for us.
So, Richard, I'm curious then from a manufacturing standpoint, obviously you're not manufacturing those attractions, but you know, when you go to a manufacturer and you say, no, it's not good enough just to have that one spot on that one vehicle that's, you know, accessible to a wheelchair. We need everything to be accessible, and here are our parameters. Are manufacturers kind of open to that? Are they looking for other ways to kind of reach the accessible community?
They certainly are. Gordon tells an interesting story. He says when he first went to the IAAPA Expo in either 2007 or 2008, and he talked about rides that could accommodate someone in a wheelchair. He says that most people laughed him out of the room. People thought he was crazy, like, no, that would never work. And, you know, now we have lots of ride vendors who want to be more involved with us. But I'll go back to that kind of that thinking aspect. It's about getting the ride manufacturer to think a little bit different about the way that ride is engineered, to think different about the G-forces, how you load, how you unload. Maybe this turn doesn't need to be so sharp. Maybe it doesn't need to hit the brakes so hard. It's just really getting folks to change the way they think about the way that a ride operates. And it's really something you have to see. It's easy to talk about, but you know, when we say we have an ultra accessible carousel, most folks don't know or don't understand what that is. It's not just the fact that it can accommodate someone who uses a wheelchair. Our carousel also sits flat on the ground, so you don't actually have to step up to get onto our carousel. We have seat belts for folks who don't have a good torso control that keep their backs, you know, on the back of the seat. So that they don't slump forward like this. Those are all the things that we have to think about. So it's just a mindset shift, and it's really not anything that is revolutionary. It's just evolving the way that we think about rides and attractions.
I'd like to go back to the phrase you used earlier when talking about architecture, and that was solving complex problems beautifully. And everything that you've just described in the last several minutes, I feel like fits into that idea, that mindset. And where I wonder, or what I'm curious of is, you use the term ultra accessible and you say it is, it is a park for everyone. You gave specific examples of the visually impaired ride operator, of the guest on the zip line with the breathing apparatus, of accessing the wheelchair, in a flat surface, and the seatbelt design for it. There are so many different whether it's disabilities or whether it's limitations or kind of anything in that realm. It's a tall order to be able to serve every single guest without maybe compromising that of any other type of guest. And I'm curious, and maybe tying into the mindset of solving complex problems beautifully, how do you know that you're solving all the problems? And how do you know that it sounds like this very big puzzle coming together to make sure that it is fully accommodating for everyone?
So the honest truth is there are some people that still cannot get onto all of our rides. We try to do the most we can to accommodate as many folks as we can. One of the things I always preach here is that, accessibility is our mission, but safety is our priority. So the truth is that we have someone who, between them and their wheelchair, they are approaching 400 or 500 pounds. Their ride selection here becomes very limited. That's something that we trained our staff to talk about. That's something that we're well versed in kind of dealing with, those different types of situations. But we do our best to try to accommodate as many special needs as we can, but we know we can't accommodate everybody. But one of the things that's also unique about our rides, and I'll go back to we're for everyone. If you look at our rides, only about 20% of the seats we have on our rides are actually what we term ultra accessible. The rest are just your very typical seats, because only about 20% of our guests identify as having a special need. So it's not every single gondola and on every single ride. It's only about 20% of the ride capacity is dedicated to our friends with special needs. Because again, we do have a lot of folks who come through our park who don't identify as having a special need at all. They just want to visit a park that's different from what they've traditionally seen.
So, Richard, can you talk a little bit more about maybe some of the employees, maybe not specifically, each team member, but just the fact that you do have employees that also have special needs, and maybe even how that impacts the guest experience, being able to see someone running the carousel that maybe, similar to the way I look, that kind of thing.
It's that identity piece that you talked about is critically important. So, just like 20% of our guests identify as having a special need, about 20% of our employees identify as having a special need as well. And that goes from everything from team members who identify as having autism to team members who utilize wheelchairs. And that representation is critically important because we do want folks in the special needs community to see that, okay, there's someone who is using a wheelchair just like me, and they're operating that ride. There's someone who has low vision or low hearing, and they're working a regular job just like anybody else. It's important for folks to see that. And for a lot of special needs folks, this is actually their first job that they have here with us at Morgan's.
Richard, can you tell us a little bit about, you came to Morgan's Wonderland a couple of years ago from working, for some of the biggest parks in the business. Were there any particular surprises that stand out that maybe you had not expected or anticipated when you got there?
Of course. The nonprofit world is different. Everything about it, from being mission focused to the way the P&L works, it's definitely a huge learning curve. When I joined the organization, our founder Gordon was very direct with what he wanted. He wanted the park to be in a more sustainable place. He wanted the park to be in a place where we operated better and we operated more like a traditional theme park, which is why when they went searching for a new leader, they went searching for a theme park leader rather than a nonprofit leader. I always talk about learning is reciprocal. A lot of the staff have learned about the theme park business here from me, but I've learned about accessibility in the nonprofit world from them. So it's been a very reciprocal learning experience. I don't identify as having any special needs. I'm blessed where no one in my family identifies as having a special need. So this is a new world for me. So there's been certainly a lot of learning and a lot of takeaways here, and I can tell you that I certainly look at the world different now. I walk into HEB or which is our local grocery store or any of the retail stores, and I look at things through the lens of, is that accessible for someone who uses a motorized wheelchair now? So it just changes your view of the world a little bit.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, actually, it was up at Six Flags Great Escape. I went to an operators forum up there, and we would put people in wheelchairs so that they could see what it was like if they've never been in one. We also did an exercise where, and I was the person who had a blindfold on, and I had to try to navigate the park. And then somebody was telling me kind of where to go, what to watch out for, and things like that. And it was really, ironically, eye-opening, even though I had a blindfold on, because you take for granted so many of the things that your senses naturally pick up if you're able, to do that. If you can see, if you can hear, if you can touch, you can taste, you just naturally do those things. And it can be daunting when one of those goes away. I would imagine it's a little different if you were born without that sense, but still, if you have that at some point and then it goes away, it's got to be difficult. Switching gears just a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about, in 2024, you and Gordon got the golden ticket for leadership, which is super exciting. And I'm curious what that recognition meant to you.
It means so much. I didn't even realize that Gordon and I had been nominated. So Tim Baldwin calls me, and I was in a meeting, and he called me like 2 or 3 times. I'm like, okay, what's going on? So he sends me a message and he says, hey, I need you to call me back. There's something that's going on and we need to talk right now. And I'm like, okay, what in the world could be going on with amusement today? That's such an emergency. And he says, hey, you and Gordon have won the 2024 Leadership Award. And I was just blown away, because when I think about the folks who have won that award in previous years, the types of leaders that they are, the type of industry representatives that they are, to be able to receive the same award and to be looked upon the same way that they are, I mean, it's overwhelming. And as I said, when I was at the Golden Ticket Awards, it's a privilege to be a leader. It's a privilege to be a leader in this business. I can't really see myself doing anything else other than being a theme park leader. And I'm glad that I get to do what I do, and I'm glad that I represent such a great business.
What do you think it is that went into winning the leadership award?
Well, we have quite a few we have quite a few outside visitors who come to the park. We have folks from Universal, Merlin. We've had folks from Hershey Entertainment come and look at the park. And I always tell them, where we were in 2023 and where we are in 2024. So, I'll celebrate a couple of our accomplishments. This year will be our highest revenue and highest attendance year in the park's history. When I arrived, our active pass base was 800. This year, our active pass base finished at 11,000. So the number of accomplishments and the growth that we've seen just in the last 2 years of being here is really amazing. And the trajectory that we're really on a growth trajectory now. And this is not a slight to previous leadership or anything like that, but we had kind of fallen stagnant, which is part of the reason why Gordon and Morgan CEO Dr. Brent Fields were so adamant about wanting a theme park executive to come in and operate the park. So I think part of that award represents just the blood, the sweat, and probably some of the tears that have gone into kind of putting us on that growth trajectory and making sure that the industry sees us as a beacon of light, and that people see us really as that place for everyone, not just for folks who have special needs.
So I'm curious how this impacts you every single day as a leader. And, if you could kind of distill maybe your leadership philosophy or kind of your number one priority as an executive, what would that be?
My number one priority, well, I say I have two priorities.
Okay.
So my number one priority as an executive is a brand ambassador. And I always tell people leadership goes beyond your office. In fact, it actually goes beyond the park. Because I represent Morgan's Wonderland out in the community. I represent it on several boards. My presence in certain places represents the hospitality and tourism industry in San Antonio. So it's important that I represent us well. So you're always a brand ambassador, not just for your park, but for the industry in general. So I always want to make sure that I represent this business very well. But as an executive leader, my number one priority is to make sure that I remove obstacles for my team. I can sit here in this office all day and do spreadsheets and all types of, fun stuff like that. But the reality is the business is happening out there. It's the frontline team members, it's our seasonal supervisors, it's our frontline managers who are really out there doing the hard work. Not that my job isn't hard, but they're the ones out there who are really doing the hard work. And so it's important for me to, number one, recognize obstacles. If I don't recognize them, I need to be talking to the team to make sure that I understand what obstacles exist. And then I need to do whatever's in my power to make sure that I'm removing those obstacles. And often what I tell leaders is that when one of your team members gives you feedback about your operation or a decision you've made about the operation, don't instantly react, metabolize it, and then play it back, and then react to it. And then you'll have a much more distilled reaction to it. Because it's easy to overreact when somebody criticizes a decision that you've made, when you think you're doing the right thing for the guest, and a team member tells you, oh, that was a terrible decision. But take it and metabolize it first, and then look at it from the guest and from the team member's point of view as well, and then take it from there. And I also tell leaders, make sure that you're not part of the problem, and also make sure you are not the problem, because sometimes as leaders, we can be the problem without even knowing it.
Do you have any specific examples that you like to share, or maybe favorite failures over the course of your career that exemplify everything you say here, but were also really big learning moments for you as well?
Favorite failure. Oh boy, that's a long list right there. The failures have been where I've learned the most, honestly. I'll say here at Morgan's, one failure that I had to step back and really learn from was the way that we introduced our fast pass queuing system. If you identify as having a special need, you automatically, without cost, get a wristband that gives you front of the line access to our attractions. When I came in, we changed the way that operated a little bit so that because one of the things I noticed was that there was a lot of stress on some of our lines on our more popular attractions. And so I said, okay, rather than every single person who identifies as having a special need, giving them a wristband, let's wait for folks to just ask for it. And the feedback from folks who were in the general boarding line versus the fast pass line, who identified as having a special need but didn't have the wristband, it was bad. And folks wanted to know, well, why didn't I get that? Well, I used to get that. Why don't I get it now? And it's like, oh, well, you didn't ask for it. It was like, well, why do I have to ask for it? That was tough to hear, but the reality is that was a major shift for our guest, and we needed to go back to the way it was. We still have an opportunity to correct some of the overuse of that system there. But that was one of those things where I made a decision. It wasn't good. I needed to listen to my team. I needed to listen to the other leaders who had been here a little bit longer than I had, and dial it back and revisit it.
So, Richard, one of the things you said just a minute ago was you have to make sure that you, as the leader, are not the problem. And I think one of the things I've found is that takes a lot of self-awareness to be able to know that, hey, I'm the problem. I can look in the mirror and say, this is where the issue lies with my team, and not just say, oh, it's everybody else, right? Mm-hmm. So what sort of, I guess, guidance or advice might you have for a leader to kind of keep themselves in check to make sure they're not the problem? Because maybe they are and they don't know it.
I would say for everybody, regardless of your level, you need a mentor who is close enough to you where they see what you have going on, but they're not your friend. They're not your bestie, because your bestie's not always going to be honest with you. But that person who cares about your development more than they care about your feelings, they're going to be honest with you, and they'll tell you about yourself. And you may not want to hear what they have to say in that moment. But again, when you step back and metabolize that info, it's like, they were right.
Curious, what advice do you have for other theme parks and attractions based on the time that you spent so far at Morgan's Wonderland, but also thinking about your past as well with Six Flags and SeaWorld and Crayola? What advice would you give to other parks to be a little bit more like Morgan's Wonderland?
For other parks, it goes back to the way that we think and the way that we have approached how we design everything in our parks. And again, it's one of those things where you just kind of have to see it to really understand that it's possible. I would have never thought before that someone who is visually impaired could operate a ride, but they do. I would have never thought that someone who's in a wheelchair can operate a control panel that uses a foot pedal, because it sounds counterintuitive, but they do. There's so many opportunities out there where parks can be more inclusive if they just simply look at the way their operation is and look at it in a little bit different way.
So do you feel like one of the lessons is really kind of on the employee side? Because I think for the most part, parks that can be as accessible as they can be with the equipment they have, I think they're trying, right? And we'll give them credit for that. But where I see a maybe even a bigger opportunity is with their team members. And just like you said, just because somebody isn't in a wheelchair or is in a wheelchair, that doesn't mean they can't do something that presses an operator present switch, or do something that allows them to be a successful employee. And with people talking about, hey, it's hard to find employees now, like we should be trying to kind of, increase that umbrella a little bit with people that may have special needs. So I'm just curious if that might be an avenue for other attractions to kind of take a lesson from.
It certainly is an avenue. And I'll tell you, one of the things that I think all parks struggle with, and I know it's something that, when I led Six Flags America, it's something that we did there as well. We default to sending our special needs employees to park services because that's easy. We can train them easy. Anybody can clean. But it's really more so understanding what that person's abilities are. There's some people that they do want to go to park services. That's all they can do. But there's some folks who can do so much more than that. It's just really sitting down with the team members, talking with them and understanding, okay, where do you feel comfortable? What would you like to do? Do you want to see it? Do you want to touch it? Do you want to, do you want to feel it? Do you want to explore it? And some will say yes, some will say no. But you're right. There's some parks out there that could solve their staffing issues if they just looked at the way they hired employees a little bit different. Because again, the default is special needs sent into park services. But folks who identify as having a special need or a disability can really do so much more. And I have seen that. I can tell you it's a thing. We even have ride supervisors who identify as having a disability. And that's something that I would have never thought was possible at other parks.
So Richard, what's on the horizon? What are some of the things coming up for Morgan's Wonderland that people can expect and anticipate in the future?
Absolutely. So we're going to continue to expand our ride portfolio. And when I talk about expanding our ride portfolio, the majority of our rides right now are geared more towards small children. But we're looking for and we're challenging the folks who supply our rides to bring the thrill up a little bit. Because if you are a special needs child, at some point, you're going to be a special needs adult. And you may not always want to ride the carousel or the Ferris wheel. You may want something that's a little bit more thrilling. That's why we're so excited about our zip line, because that's really our first thrill ride that we have in the park. So over the next couple of years, we're going to be looking to age up a lot of our attractions, and we're going to be looking to add in a little bit more thrill within the parameters of someone who is in a chair can also experience it without having to get out of their chair. So we're never going to have the biggest, baddest, tallest, fastest roller coaster in the world, but we are going to look to do different types of rides where the height requirement and the age is a little bit higher. So those are some things that you can look forward to. And just in general, just pushing that message that we are for everybody. Yes, we go the extra mile to make sure we can accommodate our friends who identify as having a special need or a disability, but we really are for everyone. In fact, because we let special needs folks in for free and folks who identify as having a disability, the folks who come in who don't identify as having a special need, they actually help us out because they help to supplement for the folks that we let in for free. So they allow us to do more of what we do every day.
Richard, one thing that just kind of occurred to me, and I will, full transparency, I'm a ride guy, so I love when you're talking about rides, but I also know that's not the only element of the Morgan's experience. So can you quickly talk a little bit about maybe what are some of those accommodations that we make in food and beverage or retail that kind of fall into that ultra accessible category?
Absolutely. So when you think about food and retail, we look at our stores and we say, okay, how can someone who is in a wheelchair navigate through this store? Do we have touch sensitive items? Do we have material, the material on our shirts, will it irritate the neck? Those types of things like that are very important for someone who identifies as having a special need. For our food and beverage, there's not too much that's special about that. It's, burgers, chicken tenders, fries, those kind of things. What's unique about Morgan's though is that we do allow folks to bring in their own food. So if you identify as having a special needs, you have a special dietary requirement. It's not like another park where you can't bring in outside food. We allow you to bring in outside food so that your specific dietary need is taken care of.
Very interesting. So Richard, we have maybe just a few minutes left here, starting to wind down here. And I know you mentioned earlier, you said you can't imagine doing anything else aside from being a leader in the theme park industry. But curious, if you weren't in this industry, and maybe you alluded to this at the beginning with what you went to school for, but still want to ask the question, what do you think you'd be doing?
I think I'd be a commercial airline pilot. Yeah.
Took us in a different direction there.
Totally.
Way different direction. Yeah, way different direction. I love flying. I've taken a couple of flying lessons. Still have a long ways to go before I can fly by myself. But I think that's something, if all of a sudden something happened here and I was suddenly redirected, that would be the direction I would look towards.
Well, I've never been an airline pilot, but I'm guessing you would still have to solve complex problems in that realm. So I think that's a through line for all of that. But Richard, this has been a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for your time. If people want to learn more about you or Morgan's, where would you send them?
Absolutely. So if you want to learn more about Morgan's, you can go to morgans.org or morganswonderland.org. So morgans.org is more about our parent organization. So we're so much more than just a theme park. We have our multi-assistance center, we have our sports facility, we have our Morgans camp, and our Morgans hotel is going to be coming online soon. So that's where you can go if you want to learn more about our larger organization. But if you want to learn more about the park and what we do here, you can go to morganswonderland.org and learn everything you need to know there.
Excellent. We will make sure that all of that is in the show notes so people can access that easily. Richard, I echo Matt's comment and just expression of gratitude for your time today. This has been a fascinating interview and very inspirational as well. So I hope a lot of people really get a lot of great takeaways from listening to this. So we really appreciate your time. So thank you so much for being here. And for everyone out there who's watching and listening, just remember, we are all attraction pros.